Welcome, everybody, to episode number 4 of the Life Less Perfect podcast. I'm your host, Shauna G, and I'm super excited to have this conversation with Jeffrey Popper. And can I call you Jeff, or do you prefer Jeffrey?
Jeff is fine.
Jeff has a really interesting story that I'm excited to get into. So, Jeffrey, once known for a troubled past, has walked a path marked by intense challenges and profound transformation. After struggling with alcoholism and addiction, Jeff faced incarceration for the armed robbery of the Stardust Casino, a turning point that would ultimately lead to redemption. He also suffered a near-fatal accident that then forced him to relearn basic steps, beginning the physical and spiritual journey that would ultimately change his life. From those ashes, Jeff has rebuilt himself, eventually answering a deep calling as a hospice chaplain. Today, Jeff serves those at the end of life with empathy and insight, believing that even the darkest paths can lead to light. Wow. Jeffrey, that blew my mind. When you reached out to me, I was just like, I was so excited to talk to you because this is really what I'm super passionate. So first of all, say hi to everybody for me, Jeff.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Yeah, I just, so, I don't even know where to start. There's so many avenues here we could go. So, but why don't we start? Because I'm curious about what kind of led you down this path of, sort of missing the mark, shall we say, where you were sort of off on a different path than most would follow. I would say, well, I shouldn't say that. Many of us struggle with addictions, right? So what was it about maybe your background or your upbringing that you think led you to that sort of path? And we can maybe start there.
Sure. Really, it's easy because of all the siblings, I was the troubled child. I was caught shoplifting the first time I was 6 years old. And so the first time I was incarcerated was actually at age 14. And that was for distribution of a controlled substance from medications that I stole from the post office where my father worked at the time. So for me to graduate from petty crime to more serious crime, it wasn't a stretch. I started drinking 13, 14 years old, hard liquor, Jim Beam whiskey, vodka, things of that nature. And so for me to go from that point to when I look back at this and think, okay, how did I get here? Well, it was easy to see. You know how when we're young, people always ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? You want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be the president. I always wanted to be a pirate. And I literally wanted to be a pirate, a modern day. I'd watched some movie, I think it was called The Island or something, but I had planned to move down to the coast of Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, somewhere, and be a pirate. And my life has been and comically like the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, when Jack Black is coming into port and he's on the mast of the ship and it's sinking and he steps off onto the dock, onto the next adventure. That really was what my life was, day to day. And I would just step onto that dock and con my way from the harbor master and then steal his coin purse and then go on to the next show. So it really wasn't a stretch. Anybody that knew me back in that time, that wasn't a stretch for me to become what I became then and go to prison.
So interesting, because we often hear these stories of, and maybe this is true for you as well, but of these sort of kids that like, I know I myself was a latchkey kid. I wasn't getting probably the attention or being seen or heard. And so sort of ended up, on a path with kids that weren't necessarily walking straight and narrow. I was with the party crowd and looking to sort of fit in that way. But it sounds to me like you were really sort of had this kind of grand vision of yourself, that wasn't necessarily, a bad thing in your mind. It was like this super cool character. I don't know. Am I getting that right?
Actually, that is a very, very accurate description because I never liked the person I was. I
Mm,
never liked Jeff, and I didn't know how to live an ordinary life because ordinary was boring.
yeah.
And everything that I did became this grand, super, delusion of what I was going to be. I mean, I was going to have multiple ships as a pirate. I was going to live on an island and I was going to have the pirate girlfriend, the whole works of everything because I was not anything that impressed me. And I was in love with the idea of being a pirate or a biker. Of course, I didn't turn out to be either one of those, not in that sense. But just what you said, I lived a life. My father at the time was a postmaster, and my mom worked, and we were I was trouble in school and things, but I was the blemish. I was the one that was always getting in trouble, but I got the attention,
Yeah.
and it became this drug that allowed me to get the attention and people pay attention to what I have to say because nobody ever did. I was the middle child of 5 children.
Middle child syndrome, I can totally relate. And I really always want to sort of get across to my clients and my listeners, that at some point, all of us, I think, from those early ages, right, 0 to 6, that they say are the most formative, get this idea that we're not worthy, that we're not valuable, and I think it really is part of the journey of dropping into this 3D world. And I think we learn as humans through opposites. So if we're here to ultimately find and discover what unconditional love is, we start with this conditional love, right? And everyone's story is interesting to me and fascinating, So I love that. Okay, so you have this grand vision of being a pirate. Now, did I understand that you actually completed this robbery with your family, like a sibling and your father? And like, I'm curious to know how this plan got put into place or got laid.
Right. Right. And so there's a lot, of course, it would take me a few hours to give you all the details, right? So fast forward, I actually sobered up for a while when I met my first wife and my daughter came into the world. And I was working at a lumber yard in Texas and had started to clean up my life to become a dad. And I got a call at work one day, and my father had been robbed at work. He had left the post office and they had moved to Las Vegas, Beverly Hillbilly style. I kid you not, came home one day and they had a truck and a trailer with plywood stacked on the sides and everything they owned piled up inside, and they moved to Las Vegas. So I had cleaned up my act and ended up getting a divorce, which put me back in the track of addiction.
Hmm.
That's where I discovered ecstasy and cocaine and how much money could be made. Literally, I made more money on a weekend from selling the drugs and actually did the drugs than I did in 6 months working the job that I had
Wow.
in a weekend. And so paid off all my debt, but I had stepped away from that even and cleaned up myself before I ended up in prison for drugs. And when I got this call, my father had said he'd gotten robbed at work. And there's a lot of detail to give about my father, who is a diagnosed sociopath, who you can grill him for hours on anything. He could have just killed someone in the body laying in front of him, and he would deny it, and you couldn't get the polygraph to move on your best day.
Wow.
And so, and he asked me if he could come back and stay with me for a while. Well, in a short moment, when he came home driving a hot rod 1973 El Camino Super Sport, which he couldn't afford. My brother showed up in a 1969 Roadrunner, which he couldn't afford. And my dad gave me this big grand story of how he had, uncovered this gambling plot. And that I kind of realized that he told stories the way I told stories.
Mhm.
I learned this way of making things bigger from my father.
Mhm.
And turns out it was my brother who robbed my father at work. It was a setup.
Oh my goodness gracious.
They had stolen a radio, fitted it with an earpiece, and my brother waited in the casino disguised until my father was the escort for the daily receipts, and then stepped out and pointed a gun at him, and they had orchestrated the entire robbery. It was planned from the beginning. Well, he came back because they were planning the second robbery, and they needed another person to create a distraction. And he knew my background was already, I mean, he knew who I used to be all my life, was this guy who would step into doing crime with no problem. And I didn't want to until he handed me an envelope with $10,000 cash in it and told me to think about it. Going through a divorce at that time, and the courts were not friendly to men back then. And I was seeing my daughter every 2 weeks. And I thought I would get this money, I would get custody of her one way or another, and then I would move to Mexico. And that was my plan. Now, was I going to still be a pirate? I don't know. I mean, that still the possibilities. My daughter, I might change, but
Maybe a bit
But
of a landlocked pirate.
yes, yeah, I'll move to the Mexico coast, and but it was just a matter of, it really wasn't, again, it wasn't that big a step for me.
Yeah.
So we planned for 6 months maybe, but most of the planning was timing. It was doing things. And if you've ever watched Ocean's 11,
Yeah.
the franchise, that's a comedy to me,
Yeah.
because we had four rednecks from Texas, and that's all we needed was four rednecks and some smoke bombs and some cheap Halloween disguises. And
Wow.
that's how we did it. That's what we used to rob the casino.
Gosh. That
But for
is a heck of a movie right there in and of itself. Like you said, what a colorful, interesting story. Okay, so from there, so you guys actually pull off this heist. And I mean, that just is mind-boggling to me, like you said, because with some, costumes and some smoke bombs. I mean, I always think of Vegas as being, Fort Knox in terms of those casinos, like, you
well,
know,
yeah, well, that's the thing. In fact, what we relied on is their arrogance and their complacency to everything, because they thought nobody would do this. It was one of the largest casino heists in the history of Nevada at the time. And that was in 1992. So the technology for cameras, people didn't have a phone. Today, you'd have 75 people with cameras taking pictures of it. You wouldn't get away with anything,
about
because
100%.
nobody would run from it. Okay. And part of that, and I can share with you, is that, to give you an example of, is the part that I did was create a distraction. I made a phone call to house security, told them there was a fight at the pool area with a weapon. And so policy for the casino was that everybody who was armed had to report to the pool. And my brother told me that at the very moment they were going to rob the armed car driver who was carrying the money, all the security took off running. We had orchestrated this down to the second, and then we got the money, and we had discovered there was a path through the casinos there were no cameras, there was no guards. It was through the offices and through the kitchen and throughout the back door. So it was really this whole idea that their arrogance is what laid it open for them. And that arrogance, complacency, nobody would do it. The first robbery, the little cart that they pushed the money in, wasn't even locked, didn't even have a lock on it.
Wow.
Money was piled into it, 150, 200, $300,000, and they just pushed it across the casino. They don't do that now, of course. We help them change their security policy. And so, that, when I look back on it now, and I live in Louisiana, and I've got casinos literally 3 minutes from my house, and I do not set foot in them. I don't have any desire to go into a casino.
I don't imagine you would at this point. Wow, that is so interesting to me. And what a mirror for many of us, that those casinos and their arrogance, oftentimes it's our egos, right, that really do lead us down the wrong path, shall we say, and leave us open. So interesting to me. Okay, so you rob this casino, you're successful at it. I mean, how long of a period of time was it, between your robbery and did you get caught?
1 week.
Oh,
It
okay.
was 1 week. In
1 week.
fact, the reason, and it was really something, my father, who was put on a polygraph by the Gaming Commission and the FBI for the first robbery, because they felt he was involved with it.
Inside.
And they grilled him, and the polygraph never moved for over 2 hours. And he never lost his cool. And later on in prison, the prison psychiatrist, he was in prison for 16 years, said he's a sociopath. He is absolutely crazy. But there was a lot of mistakes made, that revealed themselves later. They knew we were involved in it. I had submitted a request for Privacy Information Act to the FBI about the investigation they had on me, because I was going to use that in my first book, until I found out there was 12,000 pages of investigation on me, just me,
Wow.
and over 20,000 pages on my father. They had been investigating my family for a while. So, they were after us from Vegas. They knew that we were involved, but they just didn't know where we were, because after the robbery, literally 20 minutes after the robbery, I was on an airplane coming back to Texas, and my brother was asleep on the aisle, not far from me. So they didn't even know where we were. They had blocked off the streets. They were looking for everybody, but they had no idea who. They didn't even know who they were looking for.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. What an interesting story. So from the sounds of it, then a week you wouldn't have even had much time to enjoy the money, shall we say?
Yeah. No, it was, the first day back, I had some of the money. It was, again, it would take days to give you the whole spiel of everything. But a couple of days after I got back, a UPS package arrived for me that my dad had sent with 100 grand in it. We did everything we could to keep our hands off of everything, fake IDs and all these type of things, so that they really couldn't pinpoint what it was. But we didn't know that they already knew. They already had its suspicions of what that was. And so I went that third day to the mall and bought clothes and bought stereo system. I did everything you're not supposed to do when you got dirty money.
Yeah.
And I did it all in like 2 days. And so that was really, again, the downfall of it, and there's a lot more to that. Again, though, the people who signed statements against us, the girlfriend I had at the time, I really I don't dwell on any of those things. I put those people in that position. I put them in the position to have to face the FBI and either lie or tell the truth. And that was one of the greatest growth in me personally transforming, is that I stopped blaming other people for my decisions and my choices. Even the ones that had done things that were unprovoked, what were they going through? What were they doing? And let go of that. And it purged the poison out of my system. And that's been a long process and still is going on to this day, in attending AA and a therapist, just to continually work, because it's not this instant. I think I've said this before, is that I'd like to tell you about in prison, how I found Jesus in a jail cell, and it was this great epiphany, and I started singing hymns like angels and all these things, and it wasn't. It was nothing like that whatsoever. It's been over a 30-year journey to get to where I'm at today. And so, the idea of Jesus in a jail cell, which a lot of men find Jesus in a jail cell, right? Because there's only two types of people, in my experience, having experienced prison and hospice, that pray more than anybody else. And that is the dying, and those are the people that are incarcerated. Wow. Because one is the promise of the eternal life and the things and the forgiveness, but the other is to be set free, right? Get me out of prison, get me out of this trouble. When in truly, and it did happen for me. There were some events that took place that began that, but I've had people describe things as this pivotal moment, but it's not. It was a seed that was planted that took 30 years, 32 years to get to where I'm at today. So it's this idea that the seed that's planted in us, that we know it's there. We want these things, goodness in our lives and abundance and all these, but it takes to tear out the weeds and get out the thorns and the rocks and all those things in our life. And so for me, there is a ministry called Angel Tree Ministries, put on by Prison Fellowships. And where this particular ministry, what it does is it brings gifts to the children of incarcerated parents. If your child had a parent that was incarcerated, they would get Christmas gifts. And when this happened, I signed up for it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get a chance to, my daughter will get gifts from me. Again, I was still centered on me and how I could look like the good guy. And so they brought these gifts for her for Christmas. And she wrote a letter to me that I kept until I had a fire in the house. I kept it for 20 years. That she said, thank you for the coat and thank you for the game. Love, Amanda, my daughter. And at that moment, it really was. It was a great transformation, in the sense it was the beginning of understanding. But when I look back on it and what I wrote about it, I had made it about what God was doing in me and just for me, when it was what other people were experiencing, when it was the people who had facilitated this program and who faithfully brought these gifts and were serving in that capacity. And I didn't understand what that was. Yeah. And so it was 2 years later that I got out of prison, and I was doing what most men do when they get out of prison. I was, how can I say it, pursuing adult indulgences, drinking and girlfriends, until I was in a work-related accident and nearly lost my life. as I've said, I don't know how to describe it other than I did the two-step boogie, or the waltz with a piece of heavy equipment. It tore all the skin off my right leg, it dislocated my hips, did some other damage and things. Took me a year to walk again. But it was in that moment that it was people that came to see me. It wasn't the supervisors, it wasn't my boss. It was one of the guys that I supervised that brought letters from his youth group for me to get well. It was people that have never met me that came to see me and visit me and pray with me and do all those things and encourage me. And it put me in this place of, why do people do that? Why do people do for other people who can't do for them? And so that's when I began searching for the answer for that. And then I, at first, was trying to look, I was going to be a Buddhist because it didn't really have this confines of Christian religion. And I read Confucius, and I studied Hindu, everything that I could to keep from finding out I wasn't going to be the same as the people who used to run me out of the library when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons because I was summoning demons. I was not going to be those Christian people. And so I had to find answers for these things. And that began the journey that is still going on today, that is still today. Because in that, what I discovered over these last few years is that it's a never ending thing. It's not this great transformation that you become something new. It is an ongoing morphing, evolving, flowing. It's like a lava lamp. I don't think you're old enough to remember all the lava lamps that we used to have, and they used to do all this stuff. That's what it reminds me of, the
Oh, yeah.
transformation.
I remember the lava lamps, believe you me.
Yeah.
Well, what an interesting and beautiful story. And I love that, Jeffrey, that's sort of the symbol on my podcast and also on my book is this, really circuitous path back to the one
Right.
source, the one consciousness. And it's, I know people like to think that the spiritual journey is quite linear, and it's really not.
Yes.
My whole book and story is the same thing. It's this path, and I have moments of waking up, shall we say, where I remember that I'm more than just this sort of meat suit having this experience here on this spinning rock in the middle of the universe, into remembering that there's something more here. And there was always something trying to push me back to being in service to others. And I feel like that's what your story is about as well, right? So, because I feel like there's always like these, and it's not just one, there's pivotal moments throughout our lives, right? Where we're going to be called, are you going to choose service to self, or are you going to choose service to others? And
Right.
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and it really does. In fact, you triggered an old memory in me. You ever heard the expression going down a rabbit trail?
Yep.
Okay, because rabbits, they go in and out, and they do all these things, right? And you get lost in the conversation and stuff. But I believe that that's intentional, because I use that when I speak to people, right? Is that I can listen to what you say to me, and you're trying to go down a trail because there's something there, right? And so what I started in some journal entries that I've got to revive, were what I wrote about is on the backs of rabbits, is being on the back of that rabbit, because a rabbit knows where they're going. So don't follow the rabbit, ride with the rabbit and know, where's that rabbit going? The rabbit is trying to get away from the fox or the, whatever, and it's going through those trails, and it knows exactly where it's heading.
Yeah.
So ride with the rabbit.
Ride with the rabbit. I love that. What a great analogy, And I really think too, as souls, we choose to be here to have experiences, right? And
Right.
that's ultimately, I think, what it's about. And for me, I like to think, well, I've had a lot of experiences and I've explored a lot of edges in my life. I think the trick is not to stay there too long.
Right.
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 So how long were you ultimately in prison for, Jeff?
4 years.
4 years.
But
Okay.
the only thing they could charge me with is being an accessory,
Okay.
because they couldn't even put me in Las Vegas.
Mm,
In the 4 years, and then 5 years of parole
okay.
once I got out.
Okay.
And there's a lot of details, and I wrote about it in my book, and part of it is sorting through. You brought up something about experiences, right?
Mhm.
And so these experiences, what I recently have come to understand is that these experiences, the past, instead of trying to, forget the past, because we can't really do that, right? To see it as it's a shadow image walking along with you. It's a lesson to remind you, don't do that because last time this is what happened. And so it's not this thing of you forget your past. You're not going to. That's ridiculous. But let's take that past and say, let's hold it up as a filter. Let's hold it up as something walking alongside of you to remind you that this person, this lie, the way you did these things didn't work. And so you take it on as a benefit, as a blessing, as something to give you insight. And that's what insight and wisdom is. Wisdom is taking all these failures, all these tries, all these attempts, and applying to what today is.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's what it's been. In fact, I journal a lot, and every once in a while I'll get a really, really good nugget or two. I post it on Facebook for people because you had said it before. I want to inspire people. I want to inspire people to rebuild, to take the second chances. But quite often, the most beautiful things that we build are on the ashes of our dreams.
Yeah.
That all these dreams we had are just laying in ashes, and we build right on top of them. And let it be the foundation of what the next one that might burn down too. And you build on top of those ashes. And you keep building. Yeah, and you keep building. And so for me, that's what it's been. I look back at my experiences in prison even, and I saw people shanked. I saw people get their throat cut, lots of fights, lots of events. And to this point now, did it desensitize me? I don't know. But as a chaplain, I'm able to hear the stories of people that have been incarcerated and have suffered from addiction and broken marriages and all these things. And there's no judgment in me. There's no bias. I want them today, if today's your last day, I want it to be the best day that you could possibly have today. Because that's all we got.
Yeah, you betcha. That's the key there, right there.
Right.
Live in that present moment. So, okay, so you were in prison for 4 years, and I understood you just say that you were still sort of able to get alcohol and things like that in prison. So you were still sort of struggling with addiction. When was it sort of when you were released from prison and you decided to get sober? What was the catalyst for that?
Well, the catalyst really came up to how it was affecting other people that I never recognized. Because my drinking had gone to just having a couple of drinks, I wasn't drinking the whole bottle. I wasn't getting trashed all the time. It was just a couple of drinks. The motivation came about 6 years ago, which my youngest son, who's 17 now, and 6 years ago, so he was about 12, it was Christmas. And we were going in Walmart, and I went inside where the liquor was, and I grabbed one of the biggest bottles of vodka that you could get because I was going to need some to drink, throughout time. And he looked at me and said, "Are we that bad?" I quit that Christmas. That's been 6 years ago. And the beauty is that's what led to this soul search and this really looking in, seeing the flaw, seeing the brokenness, and being okay with it.
Yeah.
And being okay with what I had failed at is not this chain, and realizing that the things that I did matter, that they did make a difference in the lives of the people. And it was still hard because I didn't start going to AA immediately. I learned in AA that I was suffering still from a dry drunk. The behaviors, the things were still there. And the greatest lesson that was taught probably 6 months ago is one of the older gentlemen that had been in AA for probably 20 years said that the greatest peace that he achieved is realize that I was just a garden variety drunk. It was not special, just an ordinary life. And it brought the subject of living the ordinary life. I never had one, an ordinary life. From the time I was 6 years old and until a young adult, I never had an ordinary life. And that's what I was trying to cope with. To adapt to what is it ordinary? I mean, I believe my son probably just came home from he's a senior. He is on half a day, right? So he's probably downstairs now, but he depends on me. If he calls, and Every single morning, I bring him a Propel water and his cologne because he's 17 and it's important. And he's in color guard, the flag group with the band. My son is at LSU, and he can call me, knows that no matter what time of the night it is, if I need to travel to LSU, which is Baton Rouge, which is 2.5 hours from here, I will be on my way.
Mm.
Even their mother, my ex-wife, calls me when her car breaks down. She can't get it jumped because people depend on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, over these last months, and I've told my son, he says, I don't want to do those things. I don't want to be nice all the time. These are the things that are right, that are good to do. And sometimes we have to make a choice to do what's right because we don't see the benefits of doing what's good for other people. We don't see that person that was responsible for that ministry in prison fellowships 32 years ago is in their part responsible for who I am today.
Yeah.
And so what come to find out with my sons and even my daughter who had a troubled marriage realizes that her value isn't based in what these other people see in her. That if they're not treating you like dad is treating you, then you don't need to have them in your life. And so realizing that every single thing I did affected in a ripple effect, like the, proverbial rock in the pond.
Yeah.
And this is why your podcast, what you do is perfect because it's a life less perfect.
Yeah.
When I shed the idea that I was this greatly transformed, this man of God, all these other things, and I let go of that baggage. Oh, my sweet Jesus. It was really literally like casting the chains off.
The freedom. Yeah.
And the other part of that is that, and I love my children.
Mm-hmm.
And I pretended for so long, for years, that the relationships were perfect.
Yeah.
And they weren't.
No.
They weren't good at all. And at times they're good. But I realized too that they're ordinary. A son that's 17, very strong-willed, brilliant, like his mother. I'll say that. No one else has to. But and has been taught that to be himself, to be authentic to who he is. That I have told him, don't you ever lie for me. Don't lie on my behalf. Don't do anything for me like that. Authenticity and truth. So, of course, he's been taught that. So he's ready to be authentic with dad, which sometimes that's not the best choice. But it's okay. And that's the whole point of what I want people to hear is that, our life, when we look back and, if you had failed marriages, failed relationships, business deals, all these things, life isn't perfect. It never has been. And when you release that, when you let go, and I can share this with you, that if you live in that perfection that you can't achieve, that's why God bless them, the OCD, they have to have everything in this perfect order. I watch them and they're about killing themselves over it. Mm-hmm. Not me. In fact, I irritate people because I'll load the dishwasher in any kind of way that it just, okay, the dishes are in there. They'll get clean.
The horror. Oh, the horror. Put that toilet paper roll out a different way. Yeah, who cares?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. But I'm the one that will go behind you and put it back the other way just because I want to antagonize you.
Exactly. Yeah. Me too, brother. Me too. I just love this conversation so much, because it really does. When we can drop those perfectionist tendencies, because they are really, to me, in my mind, and what I've learned over these many years is it's a bit of a trauma response, right? Like, once again, it goes back to, well, if I can only do this, then I'll be worthy of love.
Right. Exactly.
So when we lead by example of this shedding this perfectionist sort of wetsuit, it just gives everyone else permission to recognize, that
right.
they too, are worthy of love exactly as who you are, who you are right in this moment is worthy of love.
Right. Yeah. And that is exactly it. That is, the number one thing, love, belonging, which all are related things, right? That you belong to this group of people and people are constantly searching for this idea about being perfect to be in that group, whatever that group is, the perfect football player, the perfect cheerleader, the perfect color guard, the perfect mom, the perfect dad, and realizing that there is nobody in that group. There's nobody in there. Because everybody is pretending to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And everybody has a mask on. We just don't see it because we can't see through our mask enough to know that. No, guess what? If you know what went on in their home and their lives, they would probably tell you that it's not perfect. But key to that, one thing, I don't know if we mentioned it or not, one of the first things is loving self.
Yeah.
Because you can't really manifest love for other people. You can have compassion for them. But when you truly are authentic, and you have to be authentic with who you are to love yourself. And so until you achieve that and stop pretending to be whatever it is, there was times I was invited to preach, and I would preach at a local Methodist church, wonderful people. And I felt sick to my stomach every time I did it because I was pretending to be something. I'm just not really part of that group. Um, Still friends with all those people, but the more and more authentic I become, the less and less I get invited. And that's okay. It's really okay, because I would rather have the authentic people around me that know who I am, that know I used to have my ears pierced and I've got tattoos. And, I used to be I tell people teasingly, I have not always been a chaplain. And so if you're looking for the preacher's kid or the guy that's been married for the same woman for 30 years, okay, he's down the road at the Baptist church.
Yeah.
And they're great people.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I learned that. I want to share this. It's real important with my daughter. She grew up with a dad that was drinking, fighting, all these things. Went to prison. My son, who is at LSU, was 4 years old when I was in seminary studying Greek. I have pictures of him sitting on my shoulders with his elbow. He's a little bitty guy, propped on top of my big bald head, waiting for me to finish studying because I was at the summer learning. I had 10 weeks to learn Greek.
Wow.
And I did it. The next summer I had 10 weeks to learn Hebrew, and I did it. But they've grown up with that. They've grown up with a dad that was about education. They've grown up with a dad that, worked, and I drank, but that's normal. That's part of life. Having a drink, but for me, I can't because it's not something I can control. And so for them, they grew up with these two different dads. But it was through my daughter, what I learned from her is that what she needed from me was to listen.
Yeah.
That's it. Validate what she feels, be, a kind ear and listen, not try to advise her unless she asks for it. My one that's at LSU came out as gay at 15. And the dad I had become was like, oh, okay. Now you have a boyfriend yet? Let's have him over for Thanksgiving. His younger brother, came to the understanding he was non-binary. Mm-hmm. And so what it gave me, though, is the understanding is that what do I need to do so that I understand my children? Yeah. Not that I need to tell them how to live, but they know that dad is always in their corner. And this is still ongoing, right? This is still an ongoing thing. There's a saying that I've seen and read, most people listen to reply instead of listening to understand. We're always geared in to say, I'm going to reply to that. I'm going to tell you what that means, or I'm going to advise you on this, instead of saying, teach me what it is to you. Yeah. And so my children have taught me more about who I am than any trip to seminary, any part of education, any school of hard knocks. It's my children and the people and as chaplain have taught me how to love people in the sense, and we had said this about loving people. What is that? Right? Biblical principles, and you can look this up in Buddhism and other things, is being slow to anger, to understand what somebody is going through, to not keep a record of their wrongs. That's what love is. Love is not this, rumble and you tumble. You said, oh, they're so cute and they look good. And that's not love. There's another term for that. We'll just skip over for now. But the point is it's love, it's compassion, it's understanding. And I'm still learning that, right? I'm still learning those things. And part of that, a life less perfect, is not believing that I had perfected it just because I found God. Yeah. That I had perfected the idea of loving appropriately my ex-wife and the people in my life that did wrong me. No, I don't want to go pick up cigarettes for someone. I don't want to go get somebody's medication or go jump their car at 10 o'clock at night because it died on. No, I really don't want to, but I will. Okay, because it's a good thing to do. And being okay with, I'm grumpy in the morning because I had to get up at 5 o'clock because your car wouldn't start because you left it at the bar because you were too drunk to drive it home. I'm going to come get you and bring you to work.
Mm.
But it is truly understanding what loving yourself, forgiving yourself for your faults, and it gives you the power to love and forgive other people.
Mm. So true. I love that so much. So to me, it's really about embodying that, I think it's really what Jesus, Yeshua was teaching us, trying to teach us, trying to be a living example of,
Right.
right? All of these beautifully imperfect people that he, took into his heart and loved without condition.
Yes. Yes.
And wasn't the golden rule really, and that is this central piece, I think, in every religion around the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what is that? What is you would know this? What is that passage in the Bible? Without acts, basically.
Well, faith without works is dead.
Faith without works.
But
That's the one.
I,
I was trying to
I
think.
give you the I'll give you the one that I base everything on, right? Is Matthew 25. It says, when you went to visit the sick, you went to visit the people in prison, you fed me, you clothed me, right? It doesn't say about baptism, which is great. I'm not against any of those things. But it says, this is, were you good to the people I put before you?
Yeah.
When you do for the least of these, you do for me. And that's it. That's what I go on every day on everything that I do for people. And I tell people whenever they're struggling with, their caregivers and their children taking care of them, is to understand that, we're given, and this really is good for people to be able to care for each other, right?
Mhm.
Yes, it gets overwhelming, okay, but you are allowing them to be blessed, doing what God says, take care of each other, love each other, love thy neighbor,
Yes.
give them the cloak off your back.
Yeah.
The great deeds. No, I don't think he's enlisting anybody to part a sea anytime soon or call down plagues on Pharaoh, which, okay. If it happens, it happens. But he's telling us, go visit people who are sick.
Yeah.
Call them and tell them you care, that they're at the end of their life,
Mhm.
or they've got a cold, and tell them, hey, you need some tissues. I'll bring you some, Kleenex. So he tells us all the time, it is not these great things that people do that make the difference day to day in our lives.
Yeah.
I know people occasionally will buy the coffee for, at Starbucks from the person behind them, but that's great. Really, if you want to buy my coffee, I'm not going to tell you no. I don't like Starbucks, by the way. But anyway, I love coffee. But, yeah, but how about take that same amount of money and go give it to somebody that's homeless?
Mhm.
And but they're going to go buy beer and cigarettes. And so I'm going to tell you what, I'll go buy it for them.
Exactly.
I will go buy them that beer and ask them, can I pray with you?
Yeah. I feel the greatest thing we can do for those people is just to see them.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
see them. Like, I see
Right.
you.
And
Yeah, it's none of my business what your medicine is,
right.
what you're needing,
Right.
what you're going to use that money for. I agree
Right.
with you.
And I've been the addict.
Yeah.
I've been the addict, and I've been the alcoholic, and could easily have been one of those people
Yeah.
had it not been for the faith of others. And there's scripture, of course, that applies to that. And how when Jesus was traveling through and the friends tore the hole in the roof and lowered their friend down to be in front of Jesus, it was their faith,
Yeah.
not this person's faith to be healed.
Mm.
It was you and I saying, you know what, I will give you that $10 and go get you a beer and a pack of cigarettes. Go for it. Well, I don't even know, or a sandwich or whatever it is that you're doing. It's not up for me to decide that.
Mm.
That by faith that has been generated from what's been done in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, every single day, but that's why it's not against the traditional church. It's not against anybody's faith. Is what God gave me is I'm going to be where people need me to be.
Mm-hmm.
Be it a podcast, be it at somebody's home that is literally, and I get calls all times of the night and day. And that's the other part about being who I am, is that my son, although he's grown up with this more than half his life, that if I get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's because somebody's dying and they need me to come.
Mm-hmm.
So people now, so the fruits of doing what's right and doing what's good and being there for other people isn't this, it's not that I'm going to win the lottery tomorrow. It is how my children see me, and how the fruits of those things. And I try to teach them this. It's hard when they're young, then to ask the question, whatever you're doing, what fruit does it bear?
Mm-hmm.
What is it going to bear? Be it a podcast, be it writing a paper, shoplifting a pack of gum, whatever. What is it? What is it going to bear? Something I've got some digital art that I've done is that, if you plant the seeds, you know what a thistle flower is? It's
Yeah.
all thorny and stuff.
Yeah.
If you plant the seeds of a thistle, don't expect a rose to grow.
Mm.
So sometimes I have to, people say, what's a thistle? So I said, if you planted a watermelon seed, are you going to get a tomato? Probably not. You're going to get a watermelon. And so it's the things that we plant that we reap. And so that is it. Everything that I do, this podcast, the opportunity to support what you do and what other people do. And that's what the motivation for me is that these years of experience, these things that I've learned and developed, is to share them. So somebody finds their epiphany, their beginning of a journey.
Yeah. And that, my friend, is winning the spiritual lottery, in my opinion.
It is.
We all have different ways we define success. And, certainly my journey has not been one where most people would say, oh, I have a big house and the fancy car and all of those things. But what to me this is really all about is about having that spiritual connection, that connection with higher self, with universe, with God, with the divine source, whatever you want to label that thing. But it's that piece that has given me the strength and courage and faith to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Right. And just keep getting up every day, and that's really what we're here to help our children understand, that life is going to knock you down.
Yes.
But you don't have to stay there, right? Every day you wake up, it's an opportunity to begin again.
Right, it is.
And I just love your journey, and what a powerful testimony to that very thing, to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Now, so you got sober, and I love that your child helped you see what that you were trying to sort of escape this life, this present moment. And so how did you eventually end up in ministry? I'm curious about that. Like, what kind of led you to?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. After the accident, I decided I'm going to go to college. Mm-hmm. Right. And I was not a great student. And I thought, okay, I can't do this. And I ended up in the tutoring centers and the writing center and the math center. But on campus, they had a free lunch at the Wesley United Methodist Church. And I decided I like free lunches. And I went, and I was the older student. I was 38, almost 39 when I started college. And so started getting involved. And I was the old man of the group, of course, because these are all college kids, right? And so started getting involved because they started asking me questions about things that I really didn't have any answers for, because I really wasn't that guy yet. But I really enjoyed it. And I got involved with other churches and other things. And it was really this, I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't this, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this part and I'm going to pursue this and I'm going to become a pastor, I'm going to become a chaplain. It was still in the moment at each opportunity. One of the most important moments was I was in this, the Baptist was student ministry was on one side, the Wesley United Methodist, and there was this little area with a little pond, little fountain and some concrete seating. And I was sitting there talking to this young lady. She was like 18, first semester in school, and we were just having a conversation. It was time to go, and she said to me, "Can I pray with you?" Mm-hmm. And this is in a busy student section. This girl prayed out loud with me sitting in that student section. And I thought, this girl is braver than I am. Wow. Because I was this man of faith, right? But she'd stop and pray no matter what, no matter with who, no matter where, no matter who was watching, no matter who didn't like it. Again, the most humble people, the lessons I've learned have not been from the professors. It has been from people who are doing what they should be doing. Their faith has led them to do. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of trying to pursue becoming more like her, mm-hmm. more like somebody whose faith was driven by wanting to share a faith with somebody else. Mm-hmm. I got that first part of my education, and my ex-wife part of her family lived in Iowa, the state. In Louisiana over here, we have another place, it's called Iowa. It's spelled the same way. So I have to be clear. Anybody from my Louisiana people see this. I'm talking about Iowa, the state. And went to work and building houses and roofing. Loved it. It was serene. It was, I enjoyed the work. And that's where I encountered the Lutheran church.
Mm.
Lutheran is the old school, Martin Luther, who nailed the 95 Theses to the Catholic door, the original rebel. It's like, that's probably why I loved him, because he was the original rebel. And I loved that, and started having a conversation with the Bible studies and stuff. And the pastor of that church said to me, says, "You ever heard of seminary?" I thought that was in the movies. I didn't even think that was a real thing. I thought, oh yeah, I mean, that was like on some show or something. And he told me about it, and I had to do this interview, right, with the district presidents and all these important people, been in the church for 400 years and all this stuff. And I laid it out for them, the drugs, the women, the incarceration, everything, thinking, oh, they're just going to tell me no, and I can go back and tell the pastor and he'll leave me alone. And he says to me, "Well, Jeffrey, it sounds like you've had an interesting life, but God has something for you in seminary." 3 weeks later, I was in seminary studying Greek. The second ex-felon to be admitted to this seminary in 150 years. This is one of the original founding of the Lutheran Church. They came over from Germany. The Lutheran Church, and I was the second ex-felon ever admitted to seminary. But I will tell you this, I sat out in that lobby before the interview saying, "Okay, God, you're this big to-do, you're this miracle worker. Let's see what you got." So I'm going to tell people out there, just so you know, if you challenge God to do something,
Careful.
be careful what you ask for. Because he's going to say, "Oh, really? Hold my holy water." And he's going to do something that you didn't expect. But it really was that part of that journey. And there's so much more to that, and how things in my life fell apart, and to look back on those things, say, this failed and this failed, my marriage failed. No, well, it's life. It is life. And it wasn't so much a failure in the things that happened. It is literally today, it is what's given me the insight to be able to share with people a love and understanding of what they're going through, even if they were the ones that were at fault, and what that means to them, and how to say, forgive yourself. Yeah. Something, as as a parent, every parent that I ever meet thinks they didn't do enough. They didn't do this right. They weren't great. They didn't go to every soccer game. They weren't the parent that was, hand stitching the embroidery on the uniform shirts and whatever else, and think, man, I'm just not that great a parent. When really, it's just, again, life less perfect. It's just not about being perfect. Show up to a football game, whatever you can do, work and provide, so that they can go do these things. That's what life is like. The ordinary life. And I wrote poetry about it, ordinary joy, ordinary pain, every single thing. It really is. And then from there, when I came home from seminary, we moved back down to Texas, and everything, my marriage had fell apart, and I didn't know what to do. And this is probably I don't know if I'd say it's funny, because I wanted to tell people I became a chaplain. I was looking in the want ads for a job. I had just left seminary, and I had a background, and I saw on this website, southeasttexas.com, they were advertising for a chaplain. I had no idea what that was. I didn't know what hospice was, didn't know what that was, but I had been a con man a lot of my life. I know how to talk the game. I can be whatever. And so I went in for the interview, and they hired me. My first patient, and I wrote about her, is this sweet little old lady, and she was kind and just understanding, and I think she saw right through me personally. But when she died, I went out to my car and cried for an hour. Was not prepared. And that was the first time around, and it was about 6 years I was a chaplain. I was still an alcoholic, still emotionally a wreck from my broken marriage, and so I left there and went to do other things. I drove a truck, I ran warehouses, I did all these other things, but there was still that call to come back. And that I finally learned what being called to something really meant. And that was just recent, that I tried to be a pastor, didn't work because that was not called to that. And sometimes the call is really just to be dad. It's just to be work and love your children and teach them the right things. It isn't about this great grand thing. And so then I finally came back. I went to work for Lowe's to be a truck driver because I had a CDL, but I couldn't leave it alone anymore.
Mhm.
And somebody I had met that was just a chaplain for the company I work for now years ago is now the systems director. He's the boss of all the chaplains. They had a position come open close to where I live. I applied, they hired me. So for the last 4 years, I've been a chaplain, and it has been just in this last 4 years that truly becoming, knowing what I was called to do,
Mhm.
taking all this life, all this past experience, all these wounds, these scars, these everything to meet that one patient.
Mhm.
Not the 20 that I'm going to do this week, not the 50. I do this in Texas and in Louisiana. It's the one person, which may be the only person that God has lined up for me to see and speak to and pray with. And realizing that today, this is what I'm doing. So whether it's going to be tomorrow, if I go back to driving the truck or whatever they meet, it's just life. And so now the ministry is going to AA and being faithful to be the dad my children need me to be.
Mhm.
That's the first ministry, is to love myself enough to be that guy and love me. Go to therapy. I see a therapist and I'm not real, what's a nice word to say? He's good and I've enjoyed it, but I've gotten more out of the AA with my fellow drunks than I have out of anything else. And so it's just being with people that understand you. I have a grief support group that I run once a month. I have a caregiver support group that I run once a month for the same reason.
Mhm.
And so really the call, the ministry is just getting up each day, taking whatever comes at me, whatever it is. And I know through prayer and through devotions, and I write a devotional, and most of the time it's just for me to know what I need to prepare for that day. And I post stuff online just so I want to motivate people. And so what I learned about testimonies and about this journey, it is a living testimony. It's not what happened and what turned me to, you know, wanting to be on this journey. And those things affected that. What is it today? What is the testimony this morning? What is the testimony this afternoon once we hang up from this? What is the living, ongoing testimony? So if somebody asks me, what is it that gets you up in the morning? What is it that motivates you to do this every morning? It's because I have today. I have today. That's what I got.
Beautiful. And that's really all there ever is,
Right.
right? We have
Yeah.
this moment, we have this day, and to really move through it in a way and just being present, and life is you're going to meet people on your daily path, and like you said, it's how am I going to interact with this person? I really want to ask you, because you're working in hospice, because that's one thing I'm really passionate about. I'd really love to normalize dying and death, and take the
Mhm.
fear out of that,
Right.
because
Right.
I feel like we just live in such a world of fear. And there are people in my world, off in the alternative health space and biohacking communities and all these people. Like there's this fellow out there, Brian Johnson, who's got this t-shirt that says "Don't die," and he spends millions sort of trying to hack his way into this living forever, which great, good luck to you, friend. I wish you luck with that. But I really want to normalize it, and really, because I feel like that's one thing that maybe the Buddhists do really well, right? They say greet every day, that like today would be a great day to die, really
Right.
sort of normalizing that. So in working with hospice patients, what message would you like to impart for people around death?
Hmm. It's difficult to say a general message for people. Um, I would encourage people to prepare now. If you're 40 years old and you don't want to have a conversation about death and dying, because everybody knows it is common throughout the world that today may be it.
Yeah.
Literally it. We drive on these roads, people die in fires, car accidents every single day. The fear thing, though, comes from people are taught fear of something to control them.
Mhm.
You're taught fear to fear. We teach our children to fear fire because it's going to burn, it's going to hurt. But we use fear to control what people are doing. We don't want you to experience what your spiritual being is, or, if your faith doesn't line up with this right here, right, is, then you're upsetting the balance of things. Buddhists, do it very well, but theirs is a philosophy,
Yeah.
that doesn't, it's not a divinity of a God creating anything. And they take away that fear that the God's going to judge you and destroy you for it. Other religions do that. I mean, there's other religions that have multiple gods and the good and bad and all these things that are possible, but also have a thread of what does today represent for you. Scriptures in the Bible do tell you, don't stress, tomorrow will have enough worry for itself. We just don't read it that way.
Yeah.
We don't read it directly because a lot of what has been in traditional church. And again, I love traditional church, I love the people, but it is taught to fear what the consequences of you not obeying something. And so the message for people, even in your last days, to love yourself. And what I do quite often is encourage someone, he asks you a question, and it really triggers people into thinking, what do you want to leave behind? If it's today, if it's 20 years, what do you want to leave behind? What do you want to leave behind for your children? What do you want to tell the world today? What do you want to tell the world that you would like the world to remember about you? And when you get them down, as I think I mentioned this, I don't know if it was, being on the backs of rabbits down rabbit trails, because conversations will go down these trails, right? But the rabbit knows where they're going. And so if you give someone that chance to express themselves, be ready to listen and understand, not reply, not tell them, oh, but you're going to burn in hell for that. But to listen, to understand that their journey has been these things, is what do you want to leave behind? What would you have me tell people about you? And whenever I visit a patient, and when they can, right, a lot of the people I visit, they don't communicate. And so when it's a family member, and I said, well, tell me about them. You tell me about them. And, it's rarely ever that they will talk in detail about work. It is about fishing. It is about their favorite, down here, gumbo, chili, sausage, whatever. I mean, their foods, their music. When you encourage them that, and I say to them, so now when you're looking at your mom, your dad, whoever that's dying, what do you want to leave with your children? What do you want them to know? And if you get people to think about that, if you get them to think about what do I want them to know about me, and you get them down that conversation, I said, and get ready to ride on the backs of that rabbit. Just stay with them and listen and understand that that is what's important to them.
Beautiful.
And it's a seed. Yeah, once you plant that seed, they will never let go of that question.
I love that so much.
They will dwell on it every single day. It'll become, what am I leaving behind?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to turn that and flip that right back at you then, Jeffrey. So what is your legacy that you'd love to leave behind?
For my children, more than anything else, that my love for them wasn't because I produced them, that my love for them is unconditional and it's conditional. It's both, right? And let's see if I can sum it up. Because of the things that I've been trying to teach them about me lately, is them, okay, the first time I wrote the book that I wrote was for them, my daughter and my sons who grew up with different dads, was to truly know their dad. And that's what it is. I want them to know truly who I am and the authentic Jeff. And that was the faults. And when I get angry because you snatch something out of my hand, and I'm frustrated that you're not paying attention in class, or whatever's going on, that they know who I am. So at my funeral, my memorial, my whatever's left, that they are sitting together and they're having the same conversation. That my daughter says, yep, this is how dad was. And the son says, yep, that's who he was. I want my children to know who I am.
Authentic. The good, the bad, the ugly. Authentic.
Yeah.
Love that so much. Jeffrey, I could just talk to you for hours. And, we
Yes,
will have you back on because I feel that there's
sure.
just so much richness and depth in your story. And it's been really inspiring for me to talk to you today.
I'm
So,
here. And let me throw that in there. If any of your listeners, all 6, 7 million of them, if they have questions, if they give you feedback, whatever, please feel free, share my emails, whatever. I'll be glad to talk to them and come on again. Because in the conversation, and really this is the point again, I do like some of the stuff that I come up with, but it's a little bit of the ego in me. But because I've used it a lot on the backs of rabbits, on going down these conversations, because we hit on all these things, right? And somebody will pick up, and this is something I do with my patients, with my families. They hear one thing. One thing they heard that says, well, he said this, or she said that. What was that? And the opportunity to open up another conversation.
Yeah.
Be glad to do it. Be glad to come on again.
That is the whole premise of this podcast, is for people to find themselves somewhere in there and know that, like I said, you are worthy and perfect of unconditional love and right now in this moment. So if that's all they take away from today's conversation, I'm a happy camper.
Me too.
So Jeffrey,
Me
I'm
too.
going to, for sure, I'll post where people can find you. If you just want to maybe mention where people can find you, I'll be having that in the show notes. But if you want to let people know.
Well, I've just started my blog again, and it is Empty Prisons. It's on WordPress. I'll send that to you. And because the concept is the empty prisons, not the physical prisons, but the emotional and mental prisons we put ourselves in. And so, of course, on my Facebook page, I have a Facebook author page. And I generally don't send out, friend requests to people. I mean, I welcome them, of course. And I will very soon have up my Shopify store and things that I started doing. But this is just the beginning. In my podcast itself, I will send you the link when it's up and going.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, and my email is at emptyprisons@gmail.com.
Beautiful.
And the goal is to empty the prisons.
Love that. Wonderful. Once again, Jeffrey, thank you so much for speaking with me today and being on the Life Less Perfect podcast. And I look forward to speaking with you again very soon, and all of your blogs and things that you're going to come out with. I'll be following that for sure.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Shauna.
Take care.